In reality, the problem with simply allowing everyone to make their own decisions is that many people will choose to make very bad decisions. In fact, possibly a majority, if not a majority, then a very large minority. And so many people making so many bad decisions has enormous consequences on society. And it's very, very difficult to deal with the fallout of all these bad decisions by simply addressing the symptoms rather than the cause. Like, say, for instance, sending people to prison for uh, committing crimes to support their heroin habit rather than simply banning heroin. Now, granted, banning heroin isn't a perfect solution, but it does seem to work better than legalizing it, because if you look at places that have legalized heroin and other drugs like that, you see massive spikes in certain types of crimes like breaking and entering, theft, robbery, stuff like that. Now, as I said, the problem with libertarianism is that they don't believe in indirect harm. And I think one issue where you really see that with libertarianism is climate change. They cannot even comprehend the idea that human actions could hurt the environment because it's a form of indirect harm. They say you'd have to be crazy to believe that. Like, what kind of nonsense is that? The idea that we're pumping chemicals into the air and that's changing the weather. It's like, it seems like common sense, but it's actually not. It's a very libertarian form of so-called wisdom, the idea that, like, believing in indirect consequences is ludicrous. The idea that your actions can somehow trigger a consequence that it does not directly trigger, that to them it's ludicrous. They cannot comprehend it in any way. And another example of this, for instance, is the people who they call themselves white nationalists, but yet they still fuck and have kids with Asian women. Because it's like they can't comprehend the idea that, like, having half Asian children furthers the process of the deracination of society as a whole. They can't comprehend that because, again, it's like it's not like they're directly going out and, like, hurting a white person for being white. It's not like they're going out and directly spreading anti-white propaganda. But at the same time, by having half Asian kids, yes, they are contributing toward the decline of whiteness. And yet, so many people who call themselves white nationalists, at least, I don't know how many, but like a good number, seem to be brazenly, openly fucking Asian women and potentially having half Asian children. And another example is, frankly, with COVID. I mean, yes, the lockdown has been a huge overreaction. I think I don't even use personal freedom arguments. I use the argument that the lockdown does more damage to society as a whole than it prevents. However, I do think that the people who say that, like, there should be zero infringements ever on personal freedom because of viruses, it's like, nah. I do think that, like, yes, some infringements on personal freedom are justified, and there is such a thing as indirect consequences with COVID. Yes, it's true that, like, going around in a public place with no mask and getting close to a bunch of other people, yeah, that increases the chances you could get COVID or any virus. And I mean, yeah, with a virus like COVID, there's a good chance you could end up indirectly, like, killing an old person. But at the same time, it's like, I do agree that I do think that in this particular case, yes, there are indirect consequences to do with COVID, but at the same time, there's also huge direct and indirect consequences to do with the lockdown itself. So that's the thing. It's like you get a situation where you kind of have to balance different collective goods. There's the collective good in terms of people not getting COVID, but there's also the collective good in terms of the economy, in terms of mental health, in terms of small businesses, in terms of community, the sense of community, in terms of things like that. So, I mean, it's all it's all relative to an extent. But what I've seen a lot of lately is like libertarian rhetoric. Like, I saw the Daily Stormer, Anglin wrote a few days ago, it's feminine to want the government to legislate personal behavior in any way. That's a very, very libertarian statement. And that's saying, like, even like doing hard drugs, it's feminine to want any laws against hard drugs. And he's also saying, for instance, he said, it's communism, any policy that puts the collective good ahead of personal freedoms. So again, banning hard drugs is communism, according to what he's saying. Even like imposing, like not letting people tear down old buildings, historic buildings, and replace them with modernist eyesores, that's communism. That's feminine, like according to his logic. Like anything that inhibits personal freedom in any way is feminist communism or whatever, feminine communism. And it's like, no, this libertarian rhetoric, it's like it's gone too fucking far. There's too much libertarianism in the right lately, and it's like, frankly, if you're gonna call me a fucking communist, call me a communist. I don't fucking care. At this point, like, do it. I mean, I'd say I am in some ways a socialist. I'm not a communist at all. But it's like, whatever. If you're gonna give me that label, then fine. I honestly don't care anymore. Because I don't want to live in a fucking libertarian society. I think it'll be a shitty society. A society where anything goes and where there's all kinds of social problems because the government is not allowed to do anything to deal with any problem. Like this idea like, oh, the free market will solve it on its own. It's like, no, it often doesn't. The free market, you know what the free market will give you? It'll give you endless Avengers movies and a McDonald's on every street corner. That's what the free market will give you. The free market will give you modernist architecture and endless suburban sprawl. You know what the free market will not give you? It won't give you museums. It won't give you national parks. It won't give you historic architecture. And it won't give you a white majority society either, frankly. So you need to really ask yourselves, like, is a commitment to the free market really that important? Given the obvious social costs of it, of an anything goes mentality, not just with the economy, but with social issues as well. And again, like these people, like, they're so inconsistent because they'll say like, oh, any restriction on personal freedom is communism, but then they advocate like, you know, throwing homosexuals off buildings. So it's like, I don't know. It seems very inconsistent. Like, I say just jettison the fucking libertarian rhetoric entirely. Like, why does everybody need to pander to these fucking rednecks constantly? I don't know.